Hello, I'm Derek.
And I'm Eloa, and in this episode of Derek Draper's Space, we're going to be talking about chapter 4 of the book Create Space, which is space to check in. Now, this is in the section on space to connect. So it's the second kind of section of the book. And it opens with the story of Nick and his 3 deadbeat dads. Before you tell us a bit about Nick, I'd like to start with the lesson, as I've been doing in other episodes. So the lesson for this chapter is this: being aware of what you're feeling and why will stop you being driven by buried emotions from the past and allow you to create the space to live fully in the here and now.
Right, yeah. So this is, having done space to think, the kind of intellectual bit, we're now moving into the emotional bit, right? Around space to
This
connect.
is the bit where a lot of people, especially in business, kind of put their hands up and kind of go feelings. That's not relevant to business, right?
And boy, if you read the story of Nick, which I won't spoil, that's how it ends, right? It ends with his boss not really being able to kind of meet where Nick got to in terms of opening up. And the fundamental issue for Nick was that he was operating based on a series of feelings and beliefs about the world that were in the book we call core pathogenic beliefs that were kind of misplaced now, right? They actually, you couldn't, if you heard Nick's rather sad story, you understood exactly where they came from, right? You did not have to be Sigmund Freud to understand why he had a problem with authority figures, right? But he'd taken that early experience and was kind of projecting it onto his work, and people were thinking he's been over promoted, he can't really deliver. And I was called in to coach him, and you know, he made a lot of progress. But as we were saying a minute ago, he then had to kind of, you know, try and connect more with his boss, and his boss wasn't ready for it. But you know, really important lesson, which is, you know, before you can start to emotionally connect with other people, you have to emotionally connect with yourself.
And is that what you mean by check-in?
Yeah. So check-in means not what am I thinking, or what am I doing? They're relatively easy to answer those questions, by the way, right? It's what am I feeling, right? I don't have time to feel anything, I'm too busy. Well, often what people will say, right? It doesn't actually take very long to check in with your feelings, right? They might be confused and complex, in which case you're feeling confused and complex, right? Maybe find some space later or in another place to actually look into them a little bit more. And there's I think there's 3 or 4 actual practical kind of exercises, if you like, that you can use to check in with your feelings in the book that people can. And again, the usual kind of thing, you know, I've tried to put in 3 or 4 because one, people might think is ridiculous for them. Secondly, they don't get, oh, actually, that third one, blue skies thinking, I could do that and I'm going to try it, you know. So choose the one that works for you. But stop and create the space to check in with how you're feeling. First thing you have to do before you can think about connecting with anyone else.
On my master's programme, we talk a lot about using our feelings as a form of data and actually treating it as just as valid data as survey responses or statistics that you might gather or assessing numbers on a spreadsheet. Is that something that you broadly agree with?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think people think, you know, you hear some people say, well, feelings don't have a place in business. Well, that is literally like saying that eyes don't have a place in business, right? Or, you know, feelings are an intrinsic part of being a human being. And if you don't like what you're feeling, which is part of what feelings are, right? They're not always good. That's the whole point. Then that tells you something, you know. And so although you might have to repress it tactically in the moment, right? I mean, I was working with someone last week who said that in their yearly review, the boss had said that they were awkward and clumsy, right? Well, that's a really serious thing to say to someone, right? And it led to this person being quite upset. She didn't want to show it. And the whole issue, by the way, whether she should have shown it or could have shown it, what would have happened if she had shown it, which is what we talked about. But she felt she couldn't show it. And so she held herself together like lots of people do and then went off and cried in the toilets, right? So, you know, feelings are important to experience. You need to be a little bit in control. That's what EQ is, right? It's about having feelings but being a bit in control of them. But I would say that we need to get to the place where, as I say, the first foremost thing is that you actually know what you're feeling yourself before you start worrying about what everyone else is feeling.
I think feelings are really relevant in business for lots of reasons. And one of the ones that I want to pick up on is because I think it connects back to what we've talked about in other episodes about intuition. And that it really relates to business decisions. You might be tasked with doing something and you just get a really strong gut feeling that's quite unpleasant that it's not the right thing to do. Or someone might be doing or saying something in the organisation and there might be a kind of unconscious contract or a sort of unspoken decision not to challenge it. Maybe there's something going on with the authority or the leadership. And I think that's how we can actually really use what we're feeling to make sure that the business or the organisation that we're working for flourishes and thrives. In the book, you talk about this idea of developing a connection to your internal ally as one way to check in with yourself. Tell us about that concept.
So, first of all, I think in the book we look at your internal critic, right? And we all have one, right?
Oh, sorry, I don't know what you possibly mean.
Now, I happen to know that you've even got a name for yours. I'm not going to ask you to say, right? So, or your ally, I think you've got a name for, right? Whatever it is. So the point is that, sometimes that critic is actually helpful, right? Because in a way, the self-awareness and reflection that we talk about in other parts of the book are that critic saying, and, a constructive critic and a compassionate critic saying, could you have done that a bit differently? Maybe you let it slip there. Maybe that wasn't the best you, right? But some people's critics are not like that, right? Some people's critics are saying, you're useless, you're rubbish, you've done it again, right? And quite, the astonishing thing is how successful, in quotes, you can be in the world, right? And how little of this appears to the outside world whilst having a monstrous critic inside you, right? Hectoring you and doing you down and denigrating you almost all the time, right?
Like a critical parent, almost.
Well, and of course, as psychologists, as psychodynamic psychologists, we would say, well, maybe some of this did start with critical parents, right? And indeed, that's kind of true of Nick, the story we were talking about. But you've got your internal critic. You have to kind of do a little bit of listening and thinking and bringing that to consciousness, right? What is your internal critic saying? What's the theme that they're saying, right? There's usually a big one, right? It could be you're useless, you're greedy, you're bound to fail, right? People don't like you. Right? The critic always speaks, by the way, of absolutes. People don't like everybody. Right, they don't. These critics bear a second examination, right? And that's because what you have to do, you have to challenge them. It's all drawn sort of from cognitive behavioural therapy, right? But what you need to do when you've identified your critic, and the book kind of talks about how you do it, is you then have to identify and build your internal ally. That's a person who comes. It's a little bit like the old thing of the devil and the angel on your shoulder, right? So the ally is somebody who is talking to you in a nurturing, caring way. And to get people to understand this, it's very simple. I will say to people who are very critical about themselves and that use really horrible language, I said, and if your friend had missed the deadline on the report, would you be saying to her that she's this, that, and that? Never. Why? Well, it's nasty, it's undermining, What would that do to her confidence? I said, well, that is what you're doing to yourself all the time, right? So really important to build that internal ally. Yeah.
I think it's really about your relationship with yourself, which again can kind of sound a bit and feel a bit uncomfortable to talk about.
That's right.
But the truth is we're all in relationship with ourselves 24/7. And so it is about kind of balancing that constructive criticism with support. And I think the thing about support is it doesn't have to all be maternal. It can be quite challenging. It can be that time where, to take it into a different context, where I run and I'm out running and I get tired and I have to finish my run on a hill because I live up quite a big hill in Brighton.
Right.
And I want to walk and I say to myself, Elle, you can do this.
Right.
I'm not punishing
that's
myself.
Right. That's not the critic, that's the ally, isn't it?
It's the ally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One of the personalities that I think is very susceptible to this is called the anxious overachiever personality. They're driven to achieve, driven to excel, driven to perform, but constantly anxious while doing it. And again, I think that the shift...
And usually unhappy.
Usually unhappy. Right. And I think one of the myths about developing that kind of self-compassion, which Dr. Kristin Neff's work is all about, is that you're going to lower your standards, and that actually doesn't transpire, or maybe a tiny bit, but it's not noticeable to the outside world actually. So yeah, there's a lot of value in it. Talk to us about actual check-ins. You've got this idea of checking in with yourself, and then you've got this other type of check-in that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, so again, there's lots of examples in the book of how some companies are trying to embrace this and make it part and parcel of work, right? So they're saying, well, the last thing you would do is talk about how you're feeling, right? Actually, it's the first thing you do. You know, now in our company, CDP, we do this, right? So either on a call or if we get together as a group, we will have a check-in. How are you feeling, right? And that's not about agenda item number 4 or the new business development idea. It's how are you as a whole person feeling? Right? And you can show as much or as little as you want, right? But it's amazing how people will tend to then talk about what's going on for them, and it allows you to think, oh, that's why she was a bit grumpy before, right? Whatever it is that you know, because you see, you can't, a critic of this might say, well, you shouldn't have those feelings in that room because it's a meeting about X, Y, or Z. Well, you can't not have the feelings. It's like saying you're not having breathing in the room, right? You have, the feelings are there, right? The question is whether you are going to be able to share them, right? So checking in has this double-edged meaning. It's checking in with yourself about your feelings, but also then we go into more detail of this in the next chapter on sharing. How do you then share that?
I think the paradox is that by voicing it, it allows you to put it to one side. Whereas if you're trying to repress it all the time, it's trying to it's trying to get some space, it's trying to have some airtime. And what I will say is I think that it's an incredibly human way of working. I think, like you said, a lot of organisations now are starting to understand the value of having the whole person come to work. There's an organisation called Next Jump, which is a tech startup. They're not a startup, actually. They're a multi-billion-dollar tech company that nobody's heard of. And they weave a lot of these practices into the functioning and the culture of the organisation. And what they say is they make space for this stuff, because if they don't, most people go into work and they hide and they lie and they fake their way through the day, doing the whole, I'm fine, nothing to see
Which
here.
takes a huge amount of energy, right? The energy that you could be expending on your work is spent on all that.
Whereas that 1 minute that we take per person doing the check-in in CDP, it gives so much context to the team. It helps us all feel more connected, and then it allows us to then focus and get on with the work at hand.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Derek.
It's all right.
Okay.
The only thing I would end with, by the way, is my every one of these episodes, I say this is my favourite quote, right? You just have to accept that I've got several favourite quotes.
I would be very shocked if you just had one.
Maya Angelou, right, the American poet, said, and this is, if people only kind of took this on board when it comes to this notion of emotions and why they're important and why they're even important at work, she said, people will forget what you say and they will forget what you do, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
Very powerful. Thank you. So thanks very much for joining us, and we hope to see you on a future episode. And for more, go over to derekdrapers.space.